If you're a CMO or revenue leader at a B2B SaaS company, there's a good chance you're measuring go-to-market performance with metrics that were built over a decade ago. MQLs, SQLs, deal source, probably obsessing over high-level conversion rates. But the problem with those metrics is when pipeline goes down, they don't tell you why. We've worked with over 200 B2B SaaS companies to help them understand what actually creates pipeline. And what we found is that most teams are only measuring one fragment of how revenue gets created rather than the full system. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 9 metrics that high-performing GTM teams are actually tracking to diagnose performance issues, identify what's working, and scale pipeline creation efficiently. Let's get into it. Metric number 1, trigger type. Most companies track lead source, which tells you about the first or last touch you can see before a lead converts. But that original source might have happened 200 days ago. And since then, they've done a dozen other things. Another thing we see is that the last source leaves out a huge piece of the path to revenue by only capturing the moment someone is ready to speak to sales. Huge problem with lead source is that it totally misses nuance about where and why someone converted. And any leads that your sales team is working exist in a vacuum. So you need to track the trigger, which is what actually caused your sales team to pick up the phone and start prospecting that person. It's not the same as lead source, and it's not the same as the last thing that they did with marketing. There are lots of different examples of triggers. It could be a hand raiser, meaning they filled out a demo request or asked to speak to sales. Or they could have hit a score threshold, meaning they did the right things and hit a lead score, then got passed to sales. Or it might have been signal-driven outbound, meaning your prospecting team picked them off a list and started working them. Or they might have signed up for a free product trial if you have a PLG motion. The key here is to understand exactly what triggers your SDRs or BDRs to start prospecting to a lead or contact in the first place. Now, before I go through the rest of these metrics, there's something important that you need to understand about how to track them. Most people here track these metrics and they think they'll just add some fields in their opportunity records in Salesforce or HubSpot, but that's actually the wrong approach. Trigger type and the next few metrics I'm going to cover all happen before an opportunity ever exists. So if you try to capture them on the opportunity after the fact, you're only seeing deals that made it through. You completely miss all the failed attempts, the effort that went nowhere, and the patterns in why things didn't convert. Many companies also create opportunities before a buying conversation has ever happened, which we strongly recommend against. Prospecting and pipeline creation is its own process. In order to measure GTM impact properly, it needs its own environment. What you actually need is a separate prospecting pipeline in your CRM. This is a container that tracks each prospecting cycle as its own record. So when an MQL hits a score threshold and gets passed to sales, you create a new prospect record. You track the trigger, the activities, the timing, everything that happens while sales is working them. And when they qualify, you close that prospecting cycle and associate it with the new opportunity. This is what gives you the full picture. You can see exactly how much effort it took to create that opportunity. You can analyze all the attempts that didn't convert and understand why. You can finally measure the true efficiency of your prospecting motion, not just the wins. All right, with that in mind, let's get into the next metric. Metric number 2, prospect qualification rate. Once you're tracking triggers, the next thing you want to measure is what percentage of people actually qualify to opportunities based on that trigger. This is not your overall MQL to opportunity rate. It's not your direct traffic to meeting conversion rate. This is the qualification rate of prospects segmented by what caused sales to work the lead. When you segment it this way, you can see which triggers are actually creating pipeline and which ones are just creating activity. Let's say you pass 500 leads to sales in a month and 100 are hand raisers while 400 are scored MQLs. Without tracking the trigger, you see a blended conversion rate and have no idea why it's low. But when you track the trigger separately, you start to see patterns. With one company we worked with, hand raisers were converting to pipeline at around 27%, while the scored MQLs were converting at less than 2%. They had the same sales team, the same process, but a 10x difference in velocity on what triggered the outreach. Okay, metric number 3, number of prospecting attempts. Something most teams don't realize is you rarely convert a prospect on the first attempt. Someone might tell you to call back in 6 months, or they might ghost you after 2 emails. You might even try them 3 different times over 8 months before they finally book a meeting. The problem is that most companies track prospecting as a single linear journey, and that misses all of this nuance. What you actually need to do is track each prospecting cycle as its own separate record. So when someone says, call me back in 6 months, you close that cycle out and start a new one when you reach out again. When you do this, you start to see the real picture. With one company we worked with, it took an average of 7 attempts over 6 months to create an opportunity from a cold lead. They moved from SDR volume as the primary KPI to focusing on the right signals that convert to pipeline at the best velocity, saving endless hours of wasted effort across both marketing and sales. That completely changed how they thought about SDR productivity and how they forecast pipeline. Now, if you're watching this and realizing you don't have the people power to implement these metrics immediately, you're not alone. Most companies don't, and that's exactly why we built our pipeline growth sprint, which gives you complete clarity on what's driving pipeline and what's preventing growth in just 30 days. If you want to learn more, click the first link in the description to book a call with our team. Now, back to the metrics. Metric number 4, prospect disqualification rate. When someone doesn't become an opportunity, you need to know why. This is the golden nugget of data that companies overlook, which informs why something does not work. Did they say they're not in market right now? Are they already using a competitor? Did they just ghost your team completely? Or were they not even connected to the decision maker to begin with? Wrong person. The problem is that most companies just let these leads die without ever capturing the reason. Or even worse, the data gets overwritten when they try to reach out again later. This matters because when you see high disqualification rates from a specific trigger, it tells you something is broken upstream. This ends up being one of the fastest ways to find inefficiencies in your lead to cash process. At one company we worked with, the constant tension between marketing and sales caused leads to go unworked every day. Sales says the leads were horrible. Once they added these core metrics, they saw that both teams were right. But instead of guessing which leads to work or throwing their hands in the air, these two teams were brought closer together under the unified goal of increasing velocity. Metric number 5, velocity. This measures how long it takes from when sales first reaches out to when an opportunity actually gets created. The formula is number of qualified prospects times average deal size times qualification rate divided by the length of the prospecting cycle. Now, most companies measure their sales cycle, but that only starts when the opportunity is created. What they're missing is that there's often 30, 60, even 200 days of prospecting that happens before that. Worst of all, most companies have no clear line in the sand for when to create an opportunity, so they end up with a melting pot of buying intent that makes it impossible to optimize win rate and identify growth levers. This matters because if you don't know how long prospecting takes, you can't accurately forecast based on current or future prospecting mix and volume. And you also can't identify where prospects are getting stuck in the process. A big unlock here is to track average days from first sales outreach to opportunity creation. And as I've already said, you want to segment this by trigger type, because hand raisers are going to convert much faster than cold outbound, and you need to know that. When you see that some triggers take 90 days to convert while others take 15 days with a lower ACV and conversion to revenue, that changes how you think about your pipeline creation mechanism and gives your team real strategies for growth. Metric number 6, opportunity win rate by prospecting trigger. This is where everything starts to come together. Instead of just looking at your overall win rate, you're now looking at opportunity win rate segmented by what triggered the prospecting cycle in the first place. And when you do this, you see some pretty significant differences. This is what allows you to model the true ROI of different pipeline sources, because two opportunities are not created equal if one of those has a much higher win rate than the other. For example, you might learn that your win rate on free trials from the website is 3 times lower than an opportunity from cold outbound, even though the ACV from your free trial might be larger. This shows you where to focus and what to fix, especially if your marketing team is driving all of their demand efforts to go get more free trials. It can be misleading if the pipeline is actually being created from free trials, but you see how that has a detrimental effect later in the cycle. Metric number 7, sales cycle days by trigger. This follows the same principle as win rate. You want to know how long it takes to close a deal based on where that deal came from. And what you'll typically find is that deals from hand raisers close significantly faster than deals from cold outbound, for example. That means faster time to revenue and a lower cost of the sale. When you combine this with win rate by trigger, you start to see the full picture of which motions are actually efficient. It's not just about which ones create the most pipeline. It's about which triggers create pipeline that actually closes and closes quickly at a high ACV, which is a completely different way of thinking about where to invest your resources. Metric number 8, signal influence by journey stage. We refer to signals as the trackable first-party interactions your prospects have with your brand and marketing. Things like web visits, form submissions, content downloads, event attendance, webinar registration. Now, what most teams get wrong is they only look at signals before the lead gets past to sales, or they attempt to figure out their broader performance with just looking at signals alone. But marketing's impact doesn't just stop at opportunity creation. People continue engaging with your content while they're being prospected to and while they're in an active sales cycle. So what you want to track firstly is how much of your pipeline and revenue actually have these track signals across each stage of the buying journey. That will help you answer, how is marketing actually influencing pipeline and revenue? Next, what is the average number of signals during each stage? On average, how many signals are happening during the engagement stage? That's before prospecting. How many while they're being prospected to? And how many signals are happening and what mix of signals during the closing stage when there is an active opportunity? So why do signals matter? We see that opportunities with signals spread across a buying committee during an active sales cycle tend to close faster and at a higher rate than those without. And on the other side of the coin, we sometimes see that when there are no signals before an SDR starts prospecting, those prospects are much more likely to disqualify and never turn into anything. Marketing has a role to play in moving deals forward, not just in generating leads. And if you're not measuring signals by stage, you're missing a huge lever for improving win rates. It's also not just about how many signals, but what are the composition of those signals? Do you see that when deals win, there are certain signals or channels that drove those signals in a specific stage? When you lose, can you isolate any patterns or maybe a lack of signals overall? Signals can give you great insight, but only after you've looked at the overall funnel dynamics and can understand where the bottlenecks are and where you get the most leverage. And remember, one of the biggest reasons we say attribution is the enemy is because it's impossible to track every relevant first-party signal that your prospects have. Bonus, opportunity contact coverage. This one sounds simple, but it's actually a huge data gap for most companies. When an opportunity is created, how many contacts are associated with it? In B2B, there's almost never just one person involved in a deal. You've got a buying committee with multiple stakeholders that matter. The reason they matter is that the contact is the thread that stitches the entire journey together inside of your revenue data. If there's no contact on the opportunity, you have no way to see what that account did with marketing and with sales before the deal even started. You completely lose the ability to analyze signals and engagement history. It's like the first 2/3 of the story just disappear. So what does good look like here? High-performing teams typically have an average of 3 to 5 contacts per opportunity. When we started working with one company, they had less than 1 contact per opportunity on average, meaning that many deals had 0. Once they fixed that, they could finally see the full picture of how marketing was influencing their pipeline. More importantly, this gives you the added ability to start understanding marketing signals by persona, which is absolutely vital to any company with any sort of ABM motion. If you're feeling like you have gaps in your revenue data, well, that's a good thing. Now you know where to focus. These are actionable metrics you can hand off to your RevOps team to start implementing today. And if you want help identifying exactly where your gaps are and what's actually driving or stalling quality pipeline, our team can help you get that clarity in just 30 days through our pipeline growth sprint. To learn more about that, click the first link in the description and book a call. We'll show you exactly what's working, what's just wasting your budget, and what to fix. So again, make sure to click the link below. And if you want my complete GTM strategy, then watch this video next.